13th century, 1223. The Mongol Empire swept across Asia and into Europe like a force of nature. But their power wasn't just military superiority. It was psychological warfare perfected. Their policy was simple: surrender immediately or be erased. When the city of Nishapur resisted in 1221, Genghis Khan's forces systematically eliminated the population. Estimates suggest up to 1.7 million people. Monuments were constructed from the remains as warnings to the next city. At Herat in 1222, the same pattern. At Baghdad in 1258, the Mongols destroyed one of the world's great centers of learning. The Tigris River changed color from the devastation, first from casualties, then from destroyed libraries and their contents. The Mongol conquests killed an estimated 30 to 40 million people. Entire civilizations were deleted. Their lesson: terror isn't a side effect of conquest. Sometimes it's the strategy. July 15th, 1099. Christian crusaders breached the walls of Jerusalem after a brutal siege. What followed was 3 days of massacre. Historical accounts describe systematic violence against the city's Muslim and Jewish populations. Estimates suggest between 30,000 and 70,000 people were killed. Places of worship became sites of mass killing. The Crusaders saw it as divine will. One contemporary chronicler described the scale of killing as unprecedented, with survivors few. The city's non-Christian population was effectively eliminated over those 3 days. The siege of Jerusalem set a precedent. Holy war could justify anything. When religious conviction meets military power, the rules of war disappear. It was King Leopold II of Belgium's private property. From 1885 to 1908, the Congo was a slave colony masquerading as a humanitarian mission. The goal was rubber. The method was terror. Villages were given impossible quotas. Failure meant brutal punishment. Armed forces used systematic mutilation to enforce compliance, removing hands from those who failed to meet collection targets, creating a system of visible terror. Children were held hostage to force their fathers into dangerous work. Entire villages were destroyed. Starvation and disease were inevitable consequences of the system. Estimates suggest 5 to 13 million Congolese died. That's half the population. Leopold presented himself as a civilizing force, while his private administration turned the colony into a death camp powered by forced labor. The Congo Free State proved that genocide doesn't require gas chambers. Just quotas, profits, and the decision that certain lives don't matter. 1904, German Southwest Africa, now Namibia. The Herero people rebelled against German colonial rule. The response was extermination. General Lothar von Trotha issued an explicit order. The Herero people were to be eliminated or driven into the desert to die. The command was clear and documented. German forces poisoned water sources, sealed off escape routes, hunted survivors. Those captured were sent to concentration camps where forced labor, starvation, and disease killed thousands more. Between 65,000 and 100,000 Herero died. The Nama people faced the same fate, half their population wiped out. This was the first genocide of the 20th century. The methods, camps, extermination orders, racial ideology, would be refined by Germany 3 decades later. April 24th, 1915. The Ottoman Empire, collapsing under World War I, decided the Armenian population was a threat. Intellectuals and community leaders were rounded up first. Most were executed. Then came the deportations. Armenians were forced on death marches into the Syrian desert. No food, no water. Systematic attacks by military forces and local groups. children were separated from families. Those who survived the march often reached concentration camps where starvation and disease continued the killing. 1.5 million Armenians died. 2/3 of the Armenian population in the Ottoman Empire was eliminated. It was systematic, bureaucratic, the first modern genocide. And to this day, Turkey denies it happened. April 22, 1915, near Ypres, Belgium. German forces released 168 tons of chlorine gas across a 4-mile front. Allied soldiers watched a yellow-green cloud drift toward them. The effects were immediate and devastating. Chemical weapons had arrived. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas. Both sides used them. Gas didn't discriminate. It drifted over trenches and civilian areas. It lingered in low ground. It turned battlefields into zones where soldiers died from asphyxiation and chemical burns. By the war's end, chemical weapons caused 1.3 million casualties. 90,000 deaths. Survivors lived with destroyed respiratory systems and lifelong injuries. The Hague Convention of 1899 had banned poison gas. No one cared. When the war ended, the world was so horrified they banned chemical weapons again in the Geneva Protocol of 1925, 1941 to 1945. Nazi Germany implemented the final solution, the systematic extermination of European Jews. This wasn't war, it was industrial genocide. Jews were rounded up across occupied Europe, transported in cattle cars, and shipped to extermination camps. Auschwitz, Srebrenica, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek. At Auschwitz-Birkenau alone, over 1.1 million people were murdered. The process was factory efficient. Trains arrived. Medical officers performed selections. Some were sent to forced labor. Others were sent immediately to execution facilities. The camps operated with industrial precision. Victims' possessions were cataloged. Documentation was meticulous. The entire system was designed for maximum efficiency in mass killing. Bodies were disposed of in crematoria that operated continuously. The process was documented by the perpetrators themselves. Train schedules, requisition orders. Bureaucrats treated genocide as administrative procedure. 6 million Jews were killed. Another 5 million, Romani, disabled individuals, Slavs, political prisoners, and others deemed undesirable, were murdered in the same system. The Holocaust wasn't an explosion of rage. It was methodical. Administrators planned logistics. The entire apparatus of a modern state was directed toward extermination. Evil became bureaucratized and normalized. It remains the defining genocide of human history. Not because it was the largest, though its scale is staggering, but because it proved that modern states can turn mass murder into policy, that ordinary people can participate in brutal genocide, and that civilization's tools can be weaponized for destruction. December 1937. The Japanese Imperial Army captured Nanking, then the capital of China. What followed was 6 weeks of systematic atrocity. Soldiers went house to house, killing unarmed combatants, civilians, elderly, women, and children. Death toll estimates range from 200,000 to 300,000. Widespread violence against women occurred on a massive scale. Estimates range from 20,000 to 80,000 victims. Families were forced to witness atrocities. The violence was systematic and command-sanctioned. Officers organized killing competitions. Soldiers used prisoners for bayonet practice. Bodies filled the Yangtze River. Western missionaries and businessmen in Nanking's international safety zone documented everything. Photographs exist. Diaries exist. Testimonies exist. The evidence is overwhelming and well preserved. The Nanking Incident remains one of the most brutal chapters of World War II. and its denial by some in Japan continues to damage relations with China today. While Nanking fell, Japan operated a secret facility in occupied Manchuria. Unit 731. Officially, it was a water purification unit. Actually, it was a biological warfare research center that conducted experiments on human subjects. The compound near Harbin covered 6 square kilometers. It had laboratories, detention facilities, and crematoria. Prisoners were designated as logs, experimental subjects. Chinese prisoners, Soviet POWs, and civilians were deliberately infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid, and other diseases to study progression without treatment. Medical procedures were performed without anesthesia or consent. Extreme experiments tested human tolerance to temperature, pressure, and disease. The facility also developed biological weapons for field deployment. Disease-carrying agents were released in Chinese population centers. Water supplies were deliberately contaminated. Epidemics were weaponized. Death toll estimates range from 10,000 to over 200,000. Many died in the facility itself. Far more died from diseases intentionally released into civilian populations. After the war, the Soviet Union prosecuted some Unit 731 personnel. The United States granted immunity to the unit's leadership, including Commander Shiro Ishii, in exchange for their research data. The Americans wanted the biological weapons information and didn't want it shared with the Soviets. None of the leaders faced war crimes prosecution. Some went on to prominent careers in medicine and academia. Their knowledge was purchased with immunity. February 13, 1945. Allied bombers hit Dresden, Germany. The city had limited military value but was packed with refugees. Incendiary bombs created a firestorm that destroyed the city center. Approximately 25,000 people died. March 9, 1945. 300 American B-29 bombers dropped incendiary bombs on Tokyo. The goal was to destroy the city's wooden structures. The firestorm killed approximately 100,000 people in a single night, more than either atomic bomb would kill months later. Strategic bombing doctrine deliberately targeted urban areas. The theory: break civilian morale, cripple industrial production, end the war faster. The reality: cities burned and the war continued. These weren't accidents or collateral damage. They were planned operations with civilian casualties as the intended outcome. The question of whether area bombing constitutes a war crime remains debated. But one fact is clear: hundreds of thousands of civilians died because they lived in enemy cities. March 16, 1968. American soldiers from Charlie Company entered the village of My Lai in South Vietnam. Their orders were to clear suspected enemy forces. There were no combatants. There were farmers, elderly people, women, children. Over 4 hours, U.S. soldiers systematically killed between 347 and 504 unarmed civilians. Villagers were executed in groups. Homes were destroyed. Violence against women occurred before killings. One soldier, helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson, landed his aircraft between the massacre and fleeing civilians and threatened to engage his own forces if they continued. He saved approximately a dozen lives. The Army attempted a cover-up. It took a year for journalist Seymour Hersh to expose the truth. Only one soldier, Lieutenant William Calley, was convicted. He served 3 years under house arrest. My Lai shattered American public support for the Vietnam War. It proved that atrocities aren't committed only by the enemy. April 17, 1975. The Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, seized control of Cambodia. They promised to create an agrarian utopia. They delivered systematic killing. Cities were emptied. Phnom Penh, a city of 2 million, was evacuated in days. Anyone associated with education, the old regime, or perceived as insufficiently loyal was targeted. Money was abolished, religion was banned, families were separated, people were sent to labor camps, worked until death, starved. The regime created mass execution sites where prisoners were killed to conserve ammunition. In less than 4 years, the Khmer Rouge killed between 1.7 and 2 million people. That's 21 to 24% of Cambodia's population. An entire generation of educated Cambodians was eliminated. When Vietnam invaded in 1979 and ended the regime, the world finally saw the scale. Evidence of systematic killing, torture facilities, mass graves. Cambodia is still recovering. July 1995. The Bosnian War. Srebrenica was designated a UN safe zone, protected by a small Dutch peacekeeping force. Bosnian Serb forces, led by General Ratko Mladic, overran the town. Over the next few days, Serb forces systematically separated Bosniak Muslim men and boys from women and children. The males were taken away under the pretense of prisoner exchange. Instead, they were executed. 8,000 men and boys were killed, some in buildings, others in fields. Mass graves were created, then excavated and relocated to hide evidence. This happened in Europe. In 1995, under the watch of UN peacekeepers who were too few and too restricted to intervene effectively, the massacre was ruled a genocide by international courts. Mladic was convicted in 2017, but 8,000 people were already dead, and the failure of the international community to prevent it remains a stain on humanitarian intervention. April 6, 1994. The plane carrying Rwanda's president was shot down. Within hours, the killing began. In just 100 days, approximately 800,000 people were murdered, mostly Tutsis, killed by Hutu extremists in a planned, coordinated genocide. The preparation had been years in the making. Radio stations had broadcast anti-Tutsi propaganda. Lists had been compiled. Militias had been trained. Farm tools had been distributed as weapons. When the plane went down, it was the signal. Roadblocks appeared across the country within hours. Militias began checking identity cards. Tutsi or Hutu? The wrong answer meant death. Moderate Hutus who refused to participate were killed alongside Tutsis. Radio stations broadcast instructions and target lists. They called it work. Citizens were told to do their work each morning. The work was systematic killing. Neighbors killed neighbors. Teachers killed students. Priests killed parishioners seeking sanctuary in churches. Families were eliminated. Violence against women was widespread and systematic. The international community did worse than nothing. It actively withdrew. The UN had 2,500 peacekeepers in Rwanda when the genocide began. After 10 Belgian peacekeepers were killed, Western nations pulled their forces. The UN reduced its presence to 270 troops, enough to protect foreigners evacuating, but not Rwandans dying by thousands daily. The United States refused to use the word genocide. The word mattered. Acknowledging genocide creates legal obligations to intervene. So officials said acts of genocide instead. The semantic distinction allowed inaction. 800,000 dead in 100 days. That's 8,000 people per day, over 300 per hour, 5 deaths every minute for 3 months straight. When the killing stopped in July, Rwanda was destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of women had been victimized. Children were orphaned. 75% of the Tutsi population had been murdered. The Rwandan Genocide was the fastest mass killing since the atomic bomb. And the world had satellite imagery, media coverage, and clear warning. It simply chose not to act. August 21st, 2013. Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus. In the middle of the night, rockets carrying sarin gas hit residential areas. Families died in their sleep. Children were among the primary victims. Within hours, 1,400 people were dead. Video footage spread instantly. The evidence was clear: chemical asphyxiation. No visible wounds. The victims had suffocated. The Assad regime denied responsibility. Russia blocked UN action. The international community drew red lines and took no meaningful action when they were crossed. It happened again. Duma, 2018. Chemical agents were dropped on civilians. The pattern repeated. Attack, denial, no consequences. Chemical weapons had been banned since World War I. Syria used them on its own population. The world condemned it, sanctioned it, and allowed it to continue. The Syrian chemical attacks prove that war crimes don't require a world war. They just require the belief that you can get away with it. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, I'm sure you will enjoy the videos shown on screen. Leave a comment of what topics you would like to see in the future. Thank you again. Bye-bye.